Even with the toughest, biggest bye week of the 2024 season, I've got 10 players I think you should try to avoid if at all possible. Let's start at running back, and I'm going to say, if possible, you should avoid DeAndre Swift this week. Now, I know it might be tough for some of you to avoid DeAndre Swift this week. Maybe he's all you got at RB2, but there's definite reasons to be concerned. Last week, first game with new offensive coordinator Thomas Brown, he only out-carried Rashawn Johnson 14-10. And a trend that we have seen all season continued last week as well, with Rashawn Johnson getting 2 of the inside the 5 carries and DeAndre Swift only getting 1. There is always risk every single week of the season that Rashawn Johnson vultures a touchdown from DeAndre Swift, which right there lowers his ceiling. But also this week, going up against that Minnesota Vikings run defense, they're currently allowing the third fewest yards and touchdowns to running backs on the season. Again, I get it. Maybe Swift is the best you have, but if you have anybody even slightly better, I would advise you to bench DeAndre Swift this week. I don't think he's going to come through unless he somehow gets the touchdown here, which hasn't happened too often this year. And then you also got to avoid Mr. 6 points or 12 points. And if you don't know who that is because you're not on the live streams with us, that is Rico Dowdle. I call him Mr. 6 or 12 points because there's really no in between. Either he's going to score and get you 12 points, or he's not and going to get you about 6 fantasy points. And is that really what you want in your fantasy lineup, especially for a guy who's in one of the worst offenses now? This Cowboys offense with Cooper Rush at under center really lowers his chances of getting to that 12-point mark. This is a guy who's going to pretty much get you 5 to 6 points every single week for probably the rest of the season, sadly. You were just 100% praying that somehow this guy scores a touchdown in an offense that isn't scoring a lot of touchdowns. That is not a risk I am willing to take. I will look elsewhere, even in a tough week like week 12 at the running back position. And I will also look elsewhere if I was going to rely on Gus Edwards this week. Look, in week 11, it looked like maybe he was starting to take control of the backfield, and then he pretty much disappeared for most of the second half. But even more concerning for Gus Edwards, a guy that we said, hey, if nothing else this year he has touchdown upside, he didn't get any of the chances to score last week. Hassan Haskins got 2 goal line carries. Then J.K. Dobbins got the other goal line carry. So now we're talking about a running back who isn't going to get a lot of carries in a very tough matchup facing this Baltimore Ravens pass funnel defense who's very strong against the run and who probably isn't going to get you a touchdown either. What is the upside for Gus Edwards? There is no upside here. You're hoping this guy can score from 15, 20 yards out against the Ravens? That is not a gamble I want to take. I am benching Gus Edwards. And I'm also benching Raheem Mostert, and it's not even really difficult for me to bench Raheem Mostert. Over the last 3 games, his playing time has gone completely out the window. He's only played 23, 15, and 14% of the snaps over the last 3 games. And over the last 2 games, he has a total of 3 carries. 3 carries in 2 games. This is a guy we used to rely on and say, hey, if you're desperate, he could always score. Not anymore. If you're desperate, I don't even know what you get here. This guy has to score to not kill you. Think about that. He has to score a touchdown to not completely wreck your week. That is not a guy you want in your fantasy lineup. Even in what looks like a good matchup on paper, even what looks like he's in a good offense here, nope, it's not going to happen for Raheem Mostert. Jalen Wright starting to take over. We know Achane is the workhorse running back here. You cannot put Raheem Mostert in as a plug-and-play, touchdown potential guy anymore. He honestly should just be on waiver wire at this point. And real quick, if you're liking the video, getting any value out of it, take a second, hit that like button, subscribe. Greatly appreciate it. Let's move on to wide receivers, starting with Tank Dell. This guy only came through really one time with Nico Collins out. And even last week against the Cowboys, where Nico only played about 60% of the snaps, he still couldn't really come through for your fantasy team. Now they're going to face a Tennessee Titans defense that's a 4th best against wide receivers. Not to mention Nico Collins probably going to be full go this week, play way more snaps. Oh, and we've also kind of seen the emergence of John Mechie in this offense. I don't know what is going on with Tank Dell this year, but man, how many passes are we going to give this guy? Even in this week with all the buys here, I really don't want this guy in my fantasy lineup. I mean, yeah, he'll give you something this week, but is that what you're looking for? Just something? I need a little more upside than that with Tank Dell. I don't know why it's not happening, but it's not, and it's not going to happen in my fantasy lineups this week. And it's definitely not happening for Tyler Lockett. With DK Metcalf back last week, only 3 targets, only 2 catches. But even if you go to the game before the bye when DK Metcalf was out, he still only had 4 targets in that game. JSN is really starting to emerge as the clear number 2 target here in this offense. Tyler Lockett kind of looking like the forgotten man. Again, this is not a tough matchup for Tyler Lockett here by any stretch, but It doesn't matter. You need some targets. You need some opportunity. With DK Metcalf healthy, JSN emerging, I don't see how you could put Tyler Lockett in your lineups this week. He has major bust potential for you. I would avoid him if you can. But you definitely should not avoid the Justin Herbert new customer special on Underdog. I think Justin Herbert can get at least 1 yard this week and not bust for your pick'ems. If you haven't tried Underdog yet, sign up using promo code ENDGAME. You'll get that new customer special. Plus, you'll also get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Continuing with the wide receivers, you got to avoid Jordan Addison this week. Coming off a nice game in week 11, right? He had that 47-yard touchdown. But you take out that 47-yard touchdown, he did very little. Only 3 catches in this game. He only has more than 3 catches in one game all season long. And I don't think this week against his Bears secondary is the week he's going to go over 3 catches. This is a guy who's mostly been bad for fantasy this year. Yeah, every now and then he'll do what he did in week 11. Catch a touchdown, catch a long touchdown. But outside of that, he's been terrible. And the targets and receptions just aren't there to even give him a floor in fantasy. Now going on the road against Chicago, this is not a spot I want to take a gamble on Jordan Addison. I'm going to leave him on the bench this week if I can. And I am definitely leaving Jalen Waddle on the bench, if not leaving him on my waiver wire, to be honest. He is 4th in targets on this Dolphins offense, of course behind Tyreek Hill, but he's also behind Devon Achane, a running back, and Jonnu Smith, a tight end. He's also only topped 50 yards twice all season, and the Dolphins, for whatever reason, have gone to a very short passing game, very quick, short passing game, and that is really hurting Jalen Waddle's value. The target share isn't there, the yardage isn't there, the upside isn't there. I mean, the floor isn't even really there. Like, he has to score to give you a floor. This is not the kind of guy you want to rely on in your fantasy lineups, especially if you're in a must-win spot this week. Better to leave Jalen Waddle on the bench, if not on your waiver wire. And I know you're probably desperate at tight end this week, but you can't be desperate enough to put Tucker Kraft in your lineup. Gave you that nice goose egg last week. That's a 0 if you don't know what that is. 1 target last week. It looks like his 15 minutes of fantasy relevance is completely over in this offense. And now he gets one of the toughest matchups for tight ends against the San Francisco 49ers. On the season, they're allowing the 3rd fewest yards to tight ends, and only 2 tight ends have even scored a touchdown against them. Tucker Kraft is one of those guys you need him to score a touchdown. He's not getting a ton of targets. He's not going to rack up a ton of receptions and yards. You need him to score. Banking on a touchdown for Tucker Kraft against the San Francisco 49ers is a big gamble here, and one that I am not willing to take in week 12. And I talked about benching Tank Dell, but I think you also need to bench his quarterback, CJ Stroud. He's now only gone over 15 fantasy points 4 times on the entire season. He's only topped 20 fantasy points 1 time the whole season. Even last week with Nico back against the Cowboys, just no upside here. The real issue is, A, Joe Mixon getting all the touchdowns, and they actually have a running game that they didn't have last year, and B, the defense has stepped up this year. But also now he's got to face a Titans defense that's only allowed 1 quarterback all year to go over 250 passing yards. That was Josh Allen. And they've held 6 QBs to under 200 passing yards. Even with Nico potentially being a full go, this is not enough for me for CJ Stroud. I think you got to bench him in your 1 QB leagues. Look elsewhere at quarterback. But don't look elsewhere for your fantasy football advice in week 12. We got you covered. Everything you need to know in our playlist right here.